of the local democracy reporter is joining the meeting this morning. Can someone let Drew in?
Yep, he's in now and it's now recording.
Thank you very much, Leona. Thank you. Well, good morning, colleagues, and welcome to this meeting of the Education Committee, the first of 2021. Can we begin with any apologies for absence?
I have one apology, convener, and that is from Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Ron. Are there any declarations of interest in respect of any of the items this morning? No. Okay, well, we will move directly to item 3 this morning, which is the draft Standards and Quality Report from 2019-2020, and the Director of Education will speak to this item, Dr. Ratta.
Thank you, convener. The purpose of the report is to provide Education Committee with the opportunity to comment on the content and quality of the annual Standards and Quality Report. The draft report for 2019-20 is included as Appendix 1, which is on page 7 of your papers. As committee will be aware, the Standards and Quality Report is the result of the annual self-evaluation exercise carried out by the Quality Improvement Team, and it measures the impact and the outcomes achieved as a result of the work undertaken to implement the department's local improvement plan. It's organised under the department's vision, everyone attaining, everyone achieving through excellent experiences. And as I think committee will be aware, following feedback previously, the format has been designed to provide a sort of concise, visual and high-level summary of the progress that's been made in implementing the 2019 to 2022 local improvement plan. The range of evidence gathered is listed in paragraph 7 of your papers. The report also outlines a number of next steps, and they've been used to develop the next local improvement plan, which is the next item on the agenda. As you would anticipate, the 2019-20 report is different and includes details of how our schools and early years establishments responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly on pages 15, 20 and 25. And it highlights really the strength of the team working and our capacity within our schools and early years establishments to adapt, collaborate and support our children and families, particularly those that are most vulnerable. And it builds on the evidence that was noted by Education Committee in November as part of the NGA report for 1920 and the National Improvement Framework. With committee approval, the department plans to issue the report electronically to all parents of children attending an ERC school or early years establishment. So elected members are asked to comment on the content and quality of the annual Standards and Quality Report and instruct the director to make any amendments and take the necessary steps to produce and issue copies of the report for parents. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Director. Okay, can I invite members to comment on the content and quality of the report at this stage? If you just use your raise the hand function or wave at me. Okay, I see Frank Angel first and then Caroline Bamforth. So Frank.
Okay, thank you very much, convener. Just to say, I thought it was an excellent report. Now, before this meeting, I had met, just in the streets and neighbours, various families, and I was asking those children at the school what they felt about the education department's actions were over the COVID, and very, very positive comments. So all I can say is I have to congratulate the teaching staff and all the education department for the excellent way that they're coping with this crisis. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Dr. Angel. Councillor Bamforth.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to reiterate what Frank says. I think great thanks go to the hard work of the Education Department and the teachers and the head teachers, especially when a few weeks ago they had at short notice to reintroduce the blended learning model. So I think everyone would thank them for all their hard work. Can I ask a couple of questions? The first question is about PEF. And it is an excellent report, by the way, lots of really informative stuff in there and lots of, I just dread to think all these fantastic achievements, how how next year's going to look for the children, because, you know, of all the wonderful things they've been able to participate in this year. But hey, we are where we are. Anyway, going back to the PEF funding, I know that is obviously we know that PEF is particularly targeted towards the low SIMD, and that there was a detailed guidance in how that was to be spent, detailed guidance in the reprioritising of how was perhaps to be spent in April 2020. And I'm just wondering, I know we increased the number of our vulnerable children attending the hub schools from 24 to 228. I just wondered if you altered how you used that PEF money, given that there's been another lockdown and then another extended one. Have we altered how we use the PEF money to support those children, both the ones that are the 228 that were attending and the ones that weren't? And the second question I'd like to ask is, on page 18 you mentioned there was 216 Chromebooks, 590 others were due in August, and that you were going to be giving out a further 960, which makes 1766. Is that the final total, or have you offered more since this further lockdown, or are there plans to offer more devices to pupils? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bamforth. I'm getting just a wee touch of feedback, so can I just remind colleagues when they're not speaking just to mute their microphones? Dr. Ratter?
Maybe if I come in on I suppose the support for all our pupils to address the sort of learning loss, and particularly around that the pupil equity funding that Councillor Bamforth was raising, and then perhaps we can follow up around the devices, convener. We met with all our head teachers towards the end of November and December to talk about, you know, where they were in terms of addressing that learning loss, Councillor Bamforth. And what was very pleasing to say was that almost all of the schools were saying that the work that they've been doing, the interventions that they were using, now some of those would be as a result of the PEF funding, but some of that would also be the approaches that they've got in place. Because as you'll appreciate, you know, they have the lowest 20% money, and also just that focus on equity that's integrated much more widely across the curriculum, and in terms of their approaches that they've got in place. And I think at that point, almost all of them were saying that they thought that they had pupils back on track in terms of where they would expect them to be. There was some schools that were saying, because of the engagement that they'd had and the challenges that the young people had faced perhaps during that lockdown period, that there was still further work to do. But it was very pleasing to hear that at that point in November, December, the pupils were essentially becoming back on track in terms of where they would expect them to be. Obviously now we've got further impact of remote learning. I think what we'd say to committee is that, again, we've met with all the clusters last week and all the head teachers, and the remote learning that they're providing is of a high quality. We've given clear guidance to the schools. They already had considered that, and they've been planning for that. We've made use of the research that's out there to say we've put together some guidance around what's effective practice. And they're already, in terms of the feedback that they've been receiving from parents, getting a clear steer that is being received very positively. We were able to, they're able to give us figures. We were hearing from one head teacher at the beginning of this week that's got a roll of 404 pupils, and they were able to tell us that 403 had engaged with their remote learning offer last week. So, you know, I'm conscious that it's only week 2, but I think that probably the big difference from the remote learning last year is that probably 2 aspects. One, that there's new learning, a lot of new learning going on in a variety of ways, but also that there's live engagement in different ways, whether that's live lessons or live check-ins with pupils taking place. So that seems to be, I think, making a big difference in terms of for our children and young people and their engagement. Convener, I don't know if perhaps you want to pass over to
Certainly. Thank you, Director. I think Mr. Hay will take the question on the digital devices.
Yeah, thank you very much, Convener. And thanks, Councillor Bamforth, for your question. I suppose we are in a kind of quite a strong position when it comes to digital devices. Obviously, you'll be aware over a number of years, and we've been allocating a huge investment across the department in terms of making sure our schools are well equipped with these kind of devices. And that's also been supplemented, obviously, over the last few months. And there's a Connecting Scotland fund, a kind of national fund, which I think approximately, I've not got the exact figure to hand, but it was over 700 extra kind of Chromebooks that we'd got through that fund, and also a lot of connectivity devices. So things like making sure where families didn't have Wi-Fi in the house, we were providing a kind of mobile internet solution. Obviously, that's kind of one of the big challenges a lot of families might face, relying on a parent's mobile and things. Obviously isn't ideal when you're trying to support that home learning. And I suppose just, in terms of devices that we've been allocating now and are continuing to allocate, it's kind of maximising that as much as possible. So just, I've got a couple of figures just here to hand. I know certainly in Barhead High School, there was 190 devices were allocated last week. Carly Bar was 144. Obviously, schools are looking at making sure all devices they can allocate out are being done so, and making sure they're supporting families. Some of the big challenges we have, though, is perhaps where there's more than one child at home. So we're trying to kind of work with families to make sure we're maximising that as much as we can. But obviously, you'll be aware as well from the Deputy First Minister last week had announced an extra kind of national pot of money to support some of that remote learning. Obviously, we're just waiting to see what the impact will be for us here in East Renfrewshire and what the amount of money will be. But we'll be making sure we're kind of making extra investment. We're kind of working with some of our suppliers to identify what we can get. And one of the big challenges again will be everyone's in the same position. Every authority will be, chasing that kind of limited pool of devices that will exist, and I'm sure suppliers will be trying to get as much as possible into us. But we're certainly working with them, and we've got good relationships with our suppliers, and to make sure we can maximise that and make sure they're allocated out quickly and appropriately to where they're most needed. I hope that kind of provides a bit of a summary of where we are with that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Merrick.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I'd just like to congratulate you on the report to the Director and the staff. It's easy to navigate. I found it very easy to navigate. I like the layout of it. It doesn't only go into the details of achievements, but it gives that, there's the literacy strategy and stuff like that. So that sets the context. And I found it, like I say, very easy to navigate and quite a good read, a positive read at that. Just talking about the context, of course, we're in a pandemic at the minute, and parents are naturally worried about the education of their children at the minute, even with no matter how many devices they get. Nobody would have chosen to be in this position, but I think there's a recognition, certainly among the parent councils I go to, that the education department and the teachers and staff are doing the absolute best that they can, and they're continually learning, which is the main point. So if something didn't work today, we'll try something slightly different tomorrow, just in the technology, but we're being propelled into this situation, and I don't know if we can build a better boat to get us out than we have at the minute, and to continually update and monitor that's the only way. The teamwork comes into play there as well as evidence. Just a couple of points I wanted to talk about, and there's a lot of things to talk about, but I could be here all day, so I'm not going to do that. A couple of points were the early learning stuff. I think that's fantastic, and we see a great visual there of how children now going into primary one, we expect them to be already on path, as it were, almost, or on a path, and that can only reap benefits for the future. And when we consider the world as we come out of pandemic, this is exactly what we're going to need for many years to come. I wanted to ask a couple of questions, and one was about the attendance. Now, I see that's down slightly. These are, attendance is still very, very high, so it's down slightly, but I just wondered, was there any particular reason for that, apart from the obvious pandemic and so on? But if we can get an answer to that, and then I'll come back to my final point just after that, if that's okay. Thank you.
I'll be indulgent, Councillor Merrick, and allow you to come back.
Thank you, Paul. Sorry.
Just before we have the response, Councillor Lafferty, your hand was raised, but it's disappeared. So I just want to check, do you still want to come in?
No, some of the questions I had were posed.
Were answered. Okay.
Yeah,
I note then, I recognise Councillor Wallace as well, so I'll come to Councillor Wallace after we've had the supplementary from Councillor Merrick. Mark, I don't know if Mrs. Collins perhaps wants to take the first item on early learning.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Merrick, for your kind words. Yeah, our developmental milestones and our baseline are showing that the impact of early learning in childcare, and in particular, I think the fact that our children start straight away on their third birthday, which means that they get access to, and now they get access to 1,140 hours. And I think that the quality of experiences in our early learning childcare are sector leading, I would say, when we talk about inspection and validations from the Care Inspectorate and Education Scotland. I don't know, Director, if you'd like me to pick up on the attendance, or
happy for you to do that, Mrs. Collins. I mean, I can give some of the detail just in terms of how that sits for Councillor Merrick. So attendance is only reported nationally every 2 years, which is why we don't have equivalent figures for 2019-20 across the rest of Scotland. So we don't know what the pattern would be in other local authorities. Anecdotally, from speaking to other directors, I know that they had a similar pattern, and what we had was from sort of late January into February, as the sort of pandemic started to sort of take an impact across Scotland, we started to see that attendance fall, particularly in March. So I think you highlighted the kind of key difference there. What I would say is that sort of you'll see in the report that the previous year our attendance in primary schools had been 96.3%. Across Scotland, the average was 94.5%, and East Renfrewshire had the highest attendance of all local authorities. For secondary, the gap was actually larger. Our attendance was 93%, and across Scotland it was 90.8%. So whilst I don't have 1920s figures, and I couldn't give you a definitive picture in terms of that pattern, I do think probably that just reflects the impact of that sort of early stage of the pandemic, and children being absent, and in some cases parents keeping their children in the latter stages before they closed away from school, given some of the anxieties. But I don't know if Mrs. Collins wants to add anything around that.
It was more about some of the proactive measures we've taken to try and improve attendance. You'll be aware that our school calendar, and Mrs. Morton, who develops that in partnership with head teachers, that we try to make school holidays, the last day of school's the end of the week. Because what we've been finding is that we, certainly in our secondary schools, a lot of children were not coming in towards the end of a holiday, which might contribute. Now, it's not an East End thing. I think that's a national thing. I think it's maybe a historical thing. If I think back to my school days and asking my parents if I could stay at home, but unfortunately they were not of that view. But we've also working with our educational psychologists and one of our secondary schools and associated primaries to drill down a wee bit further about those kids that there doesn't seem to be a reason why they're not attending, and to see if we can encourage them and support them back into education. So although we are the highest, it's not good enough for us, and we're still wanting to raise the bar, so they say in one of our local schools. A school you know very well, I think, Councillor Merrick.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Merrick, your supplementary.
The supplementary was just about, as I said earlier, so many people and so many parts of East Renfrewshire and beyond have gone into making the report, including the parents and so on. But I wanted to highlight just a little bit, which is the school meals, and to congratulate the catering staff who were finalists in the APSA Best and Most Improved Performer in the School Catering National Awards. And they also maintained a Food for Life bronze medal. So I just picked that one out because I spotted it. So well done to the catering staff and well done to the schoolmates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt. That's a helpful comment. Okay, Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, convener. As someone who was brought up on the Beano and Topper in my youth, I have to say this is a wonderful presentation that you have here. I'm sure you could have squeezed in another infographic somewhere. This is, to be honest, it's not a criticism. I think it's presented extremely well. And what I particularly liked, or what I think was particularly informative, was where we're not performing terribly well. For example, you know, if we look at the infographic on page 24, which is suggesting that 1 in 5 of parents and carers considered that school centres were not being led well or managed well, yet you have made it very clear on page 26 about what you're going to do about it, continuing to provide high quality professional learning opportunities for all staff, which is to be congratulated. So of particular interest, I wonder, in previous reports that you've put out, have we ever had any feedback from parents as to its presentation? I mean, it's all very well us in the committee saying, yes, this looks wonderful and tickety-boo and what have you. Do we actually have any feedback from the parents, the people that this is targeted at, as to readability and the amount of information that's there? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace, for those comments. I think my photograph in the report is certainly more desperate than perhaps I currently appear, having taken up running during the lockdown. But I will ask Dr. Ratter just to comment on that parental consultation point, because I think it is important, as you say, that we're getting the feedback from the key kind of stakeholders, if you like.
It's not. To be honest, I think it's a very well-made point from Councillor Wallace. It's not something that's particularly come back to us. We do share it. We do make a small number of hard copies available in our schools and some of our libraries and so on. But it's maybe something we could pick up with the parent council chairs, with Mrs. Collins, just to see. We obviously have taken that feedback. As you say, Councillor Wallace, we could include a lot more detail in it, and part of the editing job is to make sure that the report doesn't get longer and longer. But actually, we could certainly pick that up with the parent council chairs, just to see if there's any sort of further feedback. And we do look at, we're always keen to see what other organisations, local authorities are doing in terms of the way they share it. And we do work with the communications team as well to make sure that some of the sort of key stories are shared, and that people are aware of it. So we've got a kind of range of strategies, but I think it's always worthwhile asking whether we could be doing that even better.
Thank you very much. Councillor Merritt, your hand's still up, but I think maybe just from your previous contribution. Okay, do we have any further contributions this morning from colleagues? Okay, I don't see any, so I would just perhaps like to summarise this morning in terms of the points made, and also just, I think, make something of a statement around standards and quality, and indeed the ongoing work, as obviously we continue with home learning at the moment. I think the report is certainly has been a year like no other, and it's certainly a draft standards and quality report like no other. We obviously meet at this point where we've returned to remote learning, and I just want to put on record my thanks to all staff, pupils and parents, the way in which they have, I think, adapted and worked with us, both in this past year of 2020 and into this beginning of 2021. I think it's really, the report really references how we have adapted, as I say, and improved and continued to improve our online delivery, and continued to have a real robust consultation and communication with parents on that. And I think we heard some very constructive comments from colleagues this morning about how that has progressed as we've gone on this journey. I also want to just highlight the amount of work that's been done to support, pastorally support our young people, particularly those who are the most vulnerable, through our hubs, whether those are, as I say, vulnerable young people or children of key workers. And I think we've seen quite a rise in the support we are providing face-to-face with vulnerable young people at this stage of 2021. Pastoral care, contact And support for the most vulnerable has really been our priority and will continue to be our priority. And we'll see that outlined in other reports that will come to committee. Councillor Merrick mentioned our catering staff and the amount of work that was done across the year by them, and indeed the awards and accolades they've received. I want to just highlight our catering and facilities management staff who've provided 1,350 school meal packs a week, in addition to hot school meals for those vulnerable children in school, which is a huge effort and been a huge amount of work. And I thank the cooks, canteen staff, janitors and other hard-working staff who've been working in-house in our schools to provide this service. And I had an opportunity to meet with some of them prior to Christmas through their trade union, the GMB, and Unison, and have a conversation with them about how important they feel that work is and how valued they feel delivering it. Obviously, colleagues, there's a degree of unknown at the moment in terms of when schools will return to face-to-face learning. We had our statement from the First Minister this week highlighting that she will make things clearer on the 2nd of February, and I would expect through the Director further reports to committee on progress of recovery, if you like, in the future. But essentially, communication's been key, and I think we've heard that as well. And Councillor Wallace made a good point there about continuing to consult with families and communicate with families about how we provide information and reports. But for me as well, there's something about communicating with parents about what we are providing currently. For example, those in receipt of free school meals, we will now move to consult and discuss with them about our provision going forward. And what options and choice they would wish to see in the future as we move through this time of pandemic. And indeed that work will begin in the next week or so. So I think communication, consultation, absolutely key. I think this is an excellent report which summarises what we have done so far. We will continue to move that forward. And I thank all colleagues for their contributions and comments this morning. So if we're happy, then can we just agree that one recommendation we have from the Director to make any amendments and take the necessary steps to produce and issue copies of the report for parents? Okay, thank you, colleagues. We come then to item 4, which is the draft local improvement plan for the period 2021 to 2024. And the Director will speak to this report.
Thank you, Convener. The draft local improvement plan is designed to give an indication of the department's key areas for improvement over the next 3 years. It takes account of the current national priority areas, including the National Improvement Framework. It's informed by East Renfrewshire's community plan, but crucially, as you would expect, cognizance has been taken of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it sets out how we will support recovery and address learning loss over the next 3 years. In addition, there's a continued focus on addressing teacher workload with a further reduction in the number of activities planned over the next 3-year period. The expected outcomes and impact are organised again under the department's vision statement of everyone attaining, everyone achieving through excellent experiences, and it's been reviewed and amended to reflect national developments and the department's ongoing self-evaluation. The plan has a clear focus on improving outcomes for all learners, and in line with the Standards in Scotland Schools, etc. Act 2000, the plan sets how we'll address the inequalities of outcome that exist for different equity groups and how we'll achieve the priorities associated with the National Improvement Framework. The plan is a high-level plan. It does set out what we will take forward over the 3 school sessions, 2021-22 through to 2023-24. And the department will continue to report on the progress that is made with its local improvement plan through the annual standards and quality report. In terms of the timing, the draft plan has been developed in time to allow establishments to take account of the priorities as they seek to develop their own improvement plans and working time agreements for next session. And it's intended to help and guide individual establishments in planning for improvement, but it doesn't prescribe what those improvements should be or how they should be taken forward. Once the plan is finalised, and I suppose just to pick up on the sort of points from earlier, this will, following Education Committee, will be shared with head teachers and parent council chairs for feedback. But once it's finalised, it will be submitted to the Scottish Government as per the Standards in Scotland Schools Act. Elected members are asked to approve the attached draft local improvement plan for 2021 through to 2024. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Director. We are asked to approve this, but I obviously want to provide time for questions and comments. Obviously, the report deals with a period up till 2024, and we very much hope that by 2024, life will return to normality, but we also know that there will be a degree of work to be done in terms of the recovery agenda from COVID. So we would want to look at this, I suppose, in quite an aspirational way, but I'm happy to invite any questions or comments on the report. Councillor Buchanan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I appreciate this is a high-level report and for obvious reasons can't be too prescriptive because there are significant unknowns involved in it that we currently face. I think it's a good report and that it covers where we want to be and what we want to see. And following on from the previous agenda item, I think sets us in a very good position. I think the main difficulty will be the pandemic, COVID responses and how we manage that. I know we are doing everything and staff are working round the clock, almost delivering services, and we've already seen that in the previous paper and heard comment already on that. But very much this will be I think a working document because we can only partially assume what may happen in the near future, but equally I suspect much of that could be subject to change and we just need to be aware of that. And I think this report sets that stall out because it clearly categorises that COVID-19 is going to be an issue and that we just need to work with that as best that we can. But yeah, I think a very good report because it sets out our stall of where we want to be.
Thank you, Councillor Buchanan. Councillor Wallace. You're on mute, Councillor Wallace. Sorry.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I'm having a bit of difficulty approving this document. I do appreciate the leader of the council saying about this is where we want to be and what we want to see. And I also appreciate that a lot of our focus will be on recovery over the next 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer than that. But my concern is about what's been dropped from last year's plan, in particular. And I think if we look at the agenda items that we're coming to later in this meeting, I do notice a lot of this is about continuing to do what we do already, and given that we appear to be quite successful in our education within East Renfrewshire relative to other state schools at least, I do have a concern it's on page 40 and it's about excellent experiences. Although you won't necessarily see it here, when we compare it to last year, one of the initiatives that's been dropped, it says last year we had continued to support staff to embed the principles of GIRFEC in all aspects of school life, and yet we don't see it this year when I would have thought that would have been absolutely high level and very much at the core of everything that we want to do. I'm just wondering, is that an omission or is that specifically being dropped for a reason? I think just a bit of explanation there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Wallace. Mrs. Collins, do you want to take this?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yeah, I think we took a good look and a good stock at what our schools are, and I would say GIRFEC principles are embedded in everything our schools are doing. So there was no need to say we will continue to embed because I'm pretty confident that they're there. I think if we go back to GIRFEC, I think it's about 13 years old now. It's been around for a long time, and I would have a concern if it wasn't embedded after 13 years. The Healthier Minds initiative and the work that we're doing to support our children has recently been recognised by Education Scotland, that we do, everything is based on those GIRFEC principles. Our children are articulate in it and our staff plan all wellbeing needs and learning needs around those principles. So it was quite deliberate, Councillor Wallace, that we feel that it needs to be maintained, but the word embedded, it's already there. So that's why we took it out.
Councillor Wallace.
Thank you. I do understand that you can't have a long list and it just gets longer and longer as every year passes by, that we're going to continue doing what we're good at. I just have difficulty allowing this to go through. Personally, it would appear that we're not going to continue to support staff to embed these principles. You know, by dropping it, it's maybe giving a subliminal message out there that it's no longer at the core of what we do. I take on board what Mrs. Collins is saying, and honestly, I don't need any further response. I just wanted to highlight that, and I just hope that perhaps it can be reintroduced at some point. My feeling is this should be at the core of everything that we do, and that it has been dropped from these draft proposals, that or the plan is a concern. I'm just marking or just putting a marker down. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your contribution, Councillor. I mean, I think I would echo what Mrs. Collins has said about that being embedded, and it is at the heart of everything we do. I think it might be useful for committee if, and I know we're going to have hopefully some presentations in the future from schools around certainly COVID recovery and things like that, but it might be useful to explore some of the work that's done around GIRFEC and some of the learning that staff have had and things like that. So certainly I would want to give you that assurance, Councillor Wallace, that we can certainly look at in more detail of what's actually happening on the ground, just to give, I suppose, the evidence to do what we've said this morning about it being embedded. So with that, I hope that's helpful. Mrs. Graham.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor. One of the things I was pleased actually to say was on that page 40, where it did say that there was a culture based on GIRFEC, on getting it right for every child. But the other thing I also wanted to say was that I was really delighted to see that the learners' experiences were all-encompassing, that they were ambitious but all-encompassing, and they included things like developing children's personalities, talents, mental, spiritual, which I was delighted to see, physical and their physical abilities to their potential. So I thought it was good. I thought it was ambitious, but I thought it was all-encompassing, and I thought it would allow East Renfrewshire to do what it does very well, which is use the flexibility to, and what schools have done, which is embrace the challenges that they've had with this COVID pandemic, and to rise to the occasion and to be able to respond in a flexible way. So I was pleased with it.
I would agree with that.
Thank you, Mrs. Graham. Mrs. Collins, do you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Graham, for those comments. I think nationally, over the past 3 years, they've tried to move away from the acronym GIRFEC because it became a tagline and maybe even tokenism. And that is a lot deeper in that. And that's where certainly be practice. And thank you, convener. I'm sure we could arrange to reassure everyone that all our activities planned around those principles, we could arrange to bring something back to committee to reassure and demonstrate that.
Very good to hear that.
Thank you very much for those points. They were very helpful. Can I invite any further comments on this paper? Okay, I think in summary then, we have expressed that it is a high-level paper, it is aspirational, that we are looking ahead, indeed, to the immediate recovery and beyond. We have highlighted GIRFEC, I think, has been a core principle and extremely important, and we would want to continue to monitor and explore that as we go forward. So I think on that basis, I would be happy to recommend that we approve the draft report.
Good. Thank you very much.
And if we're all agreed, we will move on. Thank you very much.
That's all.
Okay, we come now to item 5, which is the results of the consultation on implementation of the entitlement to 1140 hours of early learning and childcare. Mrs. Collins.
Thank you, convener. The purpose of the report is to inform members of the results of the consultation on the implementation of 1140 hours of early learning childcare in East Renfrewshire and the proposals to take this forward from August 2021 and beyond. Page 41, paragraphs 3 to 12 details the Scottish Government's transformational change agenda to provide 1140 hours of early learning childcare for all eligible children in East Renfrewshire's response and models of delivery. In particular, paragraph 7 highlights Education Committee's approval of the Department's proposal to continue to progress with plans to deliver 1,140 hours of early learning and childcare for all eligible 2-, 3 and 4-year-old children from August 2020, albeit in a more limited way given the impact of COVID-19. Paragraph 9 on page 41 details how the Children and Young People's Act 2014 sets out a requirement for local authorities to consult on early learning and childcare every 2 years and to build year-on-year more flexible models of early learning and childcare provision through reconfiguration of services. East Renfrewshire undertook its consultation from the 26th of October to 22nd of November 2020. A report on the results of our consultation can be found as part of Appendix 1 of this document, pages 51 to 58. The following key points were noted from the consultation. 389 parents responded. 80% of parents stated a high level of overall satisfaction with their current offer of 1,140 hours. The introduction of 1,140 hours suited work and family life and relieved financial pressures and reduced the amount of time grandparents were being asked to provide childcare. Lowest levels of satisfaction were linked to lack of capacity and opportunity to purchase additional hours. Respondents indicated that the setting was more important than the model, with a few having no preference. An increase in the number of families wishing to access core hours similar to school hours. Further flexibility requested in family centres. Some children not accessing their full entitlement. And satisfaction was highest in Busby, Clarkston and Eaglesham community with 94% and lowest in Giffnock and Thornliebank with 64%. Most respondents in Newton Mearns, 82%, and Barrhead, 75% also commented positively. Analysis of responses has helped to inform our models of delivery for 21-22. The Department will continue to operate the same models but extend core provision to family centres. Although core provision is our least efficient model, this move will increase flexibility and choice for families and give greater access to the most popular model and reduce oversubscription to nursery classes. As we continue to increase our capacity in our ELC estate and facilities become established, we will also reintroduce greater flexibility for parents through the purchase of additional hours in response to demand. We will do this in a context of the public health guidance and keep a mindful watch on social distancing and bubbles and increase where it's safe to do so. Page 47, paragraphs 39 to 43 outlines again the financial challenge East Renfrewshire faces with the expansion of 1,140 hours. Elected members will recall the anticipated and annual shortfall in Scottish Government funding from 21 to 22, i.e. our first full financial year of delivery of 1,140 hours. Since then, the Department has utilised the flexibility associated with this funding to maximise the amounts carried forward each year, as well as continue to lobby the Scottish Government COSLA to review the distribution methodology. Whilst we await the outcome of the national review, we will continue to seek to manage the costs of expansion closely within our annual budget setting exercise. Elected members are asked to note the Department's proposals to further increase flexibility for parents to address parental and family needs. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mrs. Collins. Can I invite any comments or questions on the paper? No, I think, oh, sorry. I saw Councillor Merrick first and then I saw Councillor Wallace, so I'll take it in that order.
Thank you, Convener. I think that what the report shows is it's been largely positive from parents, and it is those pinch points that as councillors sometimes we come to our desks, as it were, which we then just pass back on to Mrs. Collins. But it's largely a positive report. It is a positive report. It's been a good turnout. I mean, 389 seems like a large number. But what I wanted to ask, and I don't know if this is possible or how the precise model works, if people don't take up their full allocation, does that free that space up as such? that makes it accessible to people who want to buy extra time or use a different model?
Mrs. Collins?
Yeah, theoretically, yes, but what we've found is that people want to go to a certain setting. For those who don't need early learning childcare for further education or for when they're working, for those who just want their children to go as part of their entitlement, they want to go to the nursery class in particular that's associated with their primary school, and obviously nursery classes tend to be smaller than family centres, so they will tend to pick their children up at 3 o'clock when they're picking up the other kids. So the entitlement then from 3 to 6 is not being used. But moving forward, that would be something that we would be able to allow parents to use these additional hours. And we have got ad hoc arrangements we've used before, as well as contracts for longer term early learning childcare provision. We've not been able to utilise that this year because of social distancing, but also because we have displaced a lot of kids into temporary nursery places because their new buildings weren't open, they were delayed because of COVID. But theoretically, if it's staffed and we've got space, we will look to sell that hours to maximise our income as a council.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wallace?
Thank you, convener. I've got 2 questions, if it's at all possible. Okay. The first one, I was surprised to hear Councillor Merrick felt that this was largely positive. In Giffnock and Thornley Bank, his own ward, 1/3 of the people not satisfied. Sorry. I'm sure there's very good reasons. I'm sure there's very good reasons behind it, and I think the whole paper just underlines what the body of work that's gone into this. It's quite fantastic in trying to satisfy Scottish Government's desire that everybody should be absolutely delighted and have all sorts of different work patterns catered for. And I don't think we can underestimate the amount of work here. However, if I could perhaps Mrs. Collins, could you perhaps give us some information first of all on what the specific problems were in Giffnock and Thornley Bank, and then secondly, it's perhaps to the Director of Education, when we're actually moving to the kind of financial and efficiency implications of everything that we're doing here. Am I right in thinking that everything that we're supposed to be doing is being financed by Scottish Government, and yet have we received everything that we're supposed to have received? Is there a shortfall? And if there is, how we intend to continue to fund that? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take Mrs. Collins first.
Yeah, thank you, convener. In simplistic terms, Councillor Wallace, there's one of our smallest provisions is a nursery class in the Giffnock and Thornley Bank area, one that both you and I know very well. It's a fantastic nursery, but it is the smallest, and we have in simple terms, 1 class, nursery class worth of children, but every year 2 classes go into primary 1. And parents believe that it'd be better for their children, and I'm sympathetic to that. Nobody wants to have to drop off at 2 separate places, but not all primary schools have nursery classes, so we do have a population of parents that do that. But the greatest level of satisfaction comes from not being able to get into the nursery class that your child will go to primary 1. Now, there's plenty of choice and flexibility within that your ward, Giffnock and Thornley Bank, but that's the main factor. Slightly more satisfaction levels will be hoped for next year when we move to providing core within the Glenwood Family Centre, which is obviously opening, and there'll be more spaces and more flexibility. But I can confidently say that all the correspondence between parents in that ward over the last 2 years has been we've not got enough room in one nursery class.
Okay, thank you. And then on that second point, I'll maybe ask Ms Morrison to comment on the financials, if possible.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks, Councillor Wallace. Yes, outlined in the report in the finance and efficiency section, it does say there that we are currently short to undertake the full flexibility model that we had originally planned to offer our communities. As you know, historically, East Devonshire has provided quite a lot of flexibility to address the needs of families and provide the additional hours. And through the growth period that we're doing at the moment, we had to, and the fact that our facilities were not available, we had to restrict it a bit. Although we have shown there that almost all, or a lot of families are still happy. That there's some obviously wanting more choice, and as we open up the new facilities, that would part of offering the more choice. But coming with that comes obviously we need to staff to provide the flexibility in the models. We have the ability to carry forward some of the money that was provided based on how the money was allocated to us. Our money, we wanted it in a phased basis, more towards the end of when our buildings would have been open, because during that period of time, it was the buildings that were driving our ability to increase further the flexibilities. So the money actually we were given in the profile of spend, we got more money in earlier sessions, financial years, which we have carried forward into future year, so that we will be able to, because we knew there was going to be a shortfall in spending, which we highlighted, to continue to provide the fuller offer of flexibilities that our families had enjoyed before. So we have some money to carry forward based on the funding. It was limited a bit because COVID impacted in everything, and as you know, if councils were asked to look at their early learning and childcare available funding to provide to help address the shorter term, hopefully, impact of COVID, the immediacy of that. So there is some money to carry forward, but we will have a bit of a shortfall to enable us to fully go back to the fuller models that we offered families before, unless we get either additional money locally, or indeed we get additional money allocated through they're looking at the funding model at a national level. So yes, there's a bit of money that we still need. We're carrying forward a bit. There's another bit of money short. We're carrying forward, for example, at least about 1.7 million or something, that we're able to do that at the moment, which is allowed under the allocation of that money, and hopefully we'll get a better allocation as we go forward. But that is uncertain at the moment for us, but we're planning based on our staffing patterns to enable to provide just a good level of flexibility, but maybe not initially what we originally had planned in our original offer, which was always outlined in that paper, that would depend on resources, as everything is at all points. I hope that's addressed your point.
Councillor Wallace, did you? Yeah. You're still on mute, Councillor. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm just trying to focus in on this, the words here that's in para 39, the annual shortfall in Scottish Government funding. Have we been promised monies for what we're doing with these additional hours that we're putting in? So have we been promised money that we have not actually received? That's what I'm trying to find out, and I'd like to know, if that is the case, how much of a shortfall there is. Thank you.
Through the convener, we originally, this was all at the time the Scottish Government were going to fund the delivery of this, and it was monies were allocated out, but the review of their funding model was they were reviewing it to relook at the allocations, and we're waiting that back, so we may get all the funding that were needed. At the moment, we don't know, because we're waiting the outcome of the funding model. So at the moment in time, based on the existing model and the intimation of how that would be in the future, we don't have sufficient, and we have highlighted that from the original papers that have gone to committee round about early years, but we await the outcome of the review national that's going on through COSLA and the Scottish Government to look to see what allocations will be then. So it's uncertain whether we'll still remain short the gap will be closed in that vein. So I hope that addresses the further point.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Wells, I'll give you one last point and then I do want to move on. So,
well, sorry, I'm just trying to get an answer to the question. I mean, we clearly have a shortfall. Have we got, what is that shortfall? Is it £100,000? Is it 1 million? Is it 3 million? Can we have a figure of the money that we have not been provided with that we were told that we would be provided with? Thank you.
I hope you can appreciate that the monies change all the time because it depends on what we're able to carry forward that we get, what were originally promised, what was the projections at the time, what you need. So it is a fluctuating position. And initially, if it's the full financial year, obviously the consequence of that is in 22-23. So it was of the order of about, from memory, about 2 million that were short at that time. But so it is big monies that were short to deliver the whole thing. However, it has been flagged up, and it was the phasing. Our phasing, we have enabled to carry some money forward for that to enable it to go ahead. So we have to wait and see what the current scale of the problem to be definitive. I can come back with more information if that would be more. I don't have the exact figure for you at the moment. It's difficult to provide even weight as the exact figure, but I can provide a better estimate for you if that would be helpful.
Good, that's the stuff.
thank you, Ms Morrison. Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Buchanan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think initial comments on this are that I think it shows that the right decision was taken to move to the 1140 hours when we did, rather than delay that process, because what that now does is enable us to look at other flexibilities when perhaps other authorities will just be in the process of starting up and moving to 1140 hours. So I think it puts us ahead of the game. We know that for some years now we've been ahead of the game in terms of early learning capacity, and we have always tried to utilise as much as possible that capacity that we have. And I think the decision to go early or to go to the original target dates is shown to be the right one, and clearly it satisfies a huge number of parents and families that utilise the services. The future ability to then potentially increase stands us in very good stead. In terms of the funding, I know Fiona touched on it and Councillor Wallace, the methodology has currently been looked at COSLA in consultation with Scottish Government, because the initial funding was based on a lot of the capital costs, a lot of the initial setup costs that would be required to deliver 1140 hours. And that was based on the distribution method, looked at how authorities would need to set up and what work would need to be done. As we move into a delivery mode and others will still be playing catch up, that methodology is currently being reviewed, and that's what Mrs Morrison is alluding to, because those discussions are ongoing, and that will hopefully alter the levels of funding that become available as we move more to a delivery of 1140 hours and hopefully more, as opposed to this initial setup costs and a lot of the capital costs involved with that. So hopefully the right model will be achieved, and that's as part of the discussions that are ongoing in relation to that.
Thank you. Do we have any further comments or questions? Okay, thank you. In summary then, I think we have explored some of the issues surrounding implementation of 1140 hours, certainly some high levels of satisfaction. Where there are issues, we can account for those and I suppose approach parents to continue a dialogue. I think we've had a discussion there about finance. We have known the challenges around full cost recovery from Scottish Government, and those negotiations remain ongoing. And for my part, through the Children and Young People's Board at COSLA, continue also to raise the issues and raise our particular East Renfrewshire issues. And Ms Morrison will be able to provide further detail on figures as we go forward. So I think on that basis, can I ask that we are happy to note the report and indeed the increased flexibility. Okay, thank you, colleagues. We come now to item 6, which is the East Renfrewshire Children and Young People's Services Plan. This has already been through the Integration Joint Board and is brought to the Education Committee for our consideration. Mrs. Collins.
Thank you, Convener. The report presents at our heart East Renfrewshire Children and Young People's Services Plan for the period 2020 to 2023. Education Committee is requested to note the content of the plan prior to being considered by the Integration Board and remittance to Council for approval. The plan is also required to be submitted to the Scottish Government. Education Committee is asked to acknowledge the duties of the Children and Young People Act 2014 as they relate to Part 3 Children's Services Planning and Part 1 Rights of the Child, and note the content of the plan prior to consideration and final approval by Council. The plan will be submitted to Scottish Government at the end of this process. The Children and Young People Scotland Act 2014 received royal assent on the 27th of March of the same year. The legislation is a key part of the Scottish Government's strategy for making Scotland the best place in the world to grow up. Part 3 of the Act places new children's services planning duties on local authorities and health boards. Section 8 of the Act requires every local authority and its relevant health board to jointly prepare a children's services plan for the area of the local authority in respect of each 3-year period. Page 60, paragraph 5 describes how every children's services plan must be prepared with a view to securing the achievement of the 5 aims. The 5 aims being best safeguards, supports and promotes the wellbeing of children in the area, ensure that every action to meet needs is taken at the earliest appropriate time, and that where appropriate, action is taken to prevent needs arising. It is most integrated from the point of view of recipients and constitutes the best valuable of available resources. Related services in the area are provided in the way which, so far is consistent with the objects and proper delivery of service concerned, safeguards, supports and promotes the wellbeing of children. In addition, page 60, paragraph 6 outlines the key messages from the guidance, that the plan should include a focus on primary prevention, target our most vulnerable children and families, a commitment to reduce child poverty, a joined up services approach, a commitment to engage communities, further implementation of the GIRFEC approach and the wellbeing indicators as means to evaluate impact. It also asks for a strategic commissioning approach to planning together and what constitutes the best use of available resources. Page 60, paragraph 7 outlines our statutory guidance, in particular the need for alignment between Children's Services Plan, existing plans and legislation. This includes our community planning partnership, local outcome plans, our local health boards plans, our early years strategy, our corporate parenting plans, our community learning and development plans, the Community Justice Act, Childcare, Community Empowerment Act, and in particular the parts 1, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 18 of the Children and Young People's Act. Pages 65 to 114 contains the plan itself. It provides detail of all the joined up multi-agency working across all services with a focus on key themes and indicators, consequently improving the outcomes for the children of East Renfrewshire. Page 72 illustrates our plan on a page, detailing our vision, our approach, our priorities, our outcomes and our measures. At the heart of our plan is a focus on keeping children in East Renfrewshire safe, protecting their mental health and wellbeing, looking after our care experienced and care leavers, reaching out to families within families, and focusing on children with complex additional needs. Elected members are asked to acknowledge the new duties of the Children and Young People Act as they relate to Part 3 of the Children's Services Planning and Part 1 of the Rights of the Child, and note the content of our services plan for 2023 prior to final approval by Council. The plan will be submitted to Scottish Government at the end of this process. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mrs. Collins. I think I misspoke and said it had been to IGB. This is peril of not being on the IGB anymore. I think it's still to go there. Am I right in saying that, Mrs. Collins?
I think at the time it was going to go to the IGB after this, but I get a feeling that it did go this week, so you were right, Councillor. Okay.
There you go. First time for everything, right enough. Okay, thank you for that report, and I would welcome questions and comments. I see Councillor Wallace has indicated.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't realise that the hand was up. The hand would have gone up anyway, as you well know.
Fine.
Okay. Right. First of all, I think anything that's underlining the health and well-being of our young people is of great benefit. We know in East Renfrewshire that we've been very focused on early years, and I know there's a huge focus also on the corporate parenting side of things, and it is our responsibility as elected members to make sure that this is put through and we can support our youngsters as much as we possibly can. Interested to know, in terms of the promise, as down here, following the report or the consultation exercise that was carried out, what impact does the promise have, or the findings from the promise, or the recommendations from the promise? What impact did that have on our own operations within East Renfrewshire? That possibly leads me to the second one, in which it mentions a suite of new priorities. I dare say these two questions are tied up, so I'd be interested to know exactly what you mean by the new suite of new priorities. And I think finally, I noticed a number of KPIs, the number of indicators that have been built in to measure how successful or otherwise we're going to be at delivering these services. Which ones of these are new KPIs? Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Collins.
Forgive me, I'll need to flick between my screen when we get to the KPI to give you an accurate response. I think the promise, we were fortunate that the young people and families within East Renfrewshire took part in that engagement, and prior to lockdown we were also fortunate that they chose to come and launch the material, and I know some of you were there. Although I think we have a good baseline, and I think the Champions Board and our activity that's going on for the past 3-4 years has really made a difference and made sure that children and young people's voices are heard. I think a lot of the messages that did come out of the promise were relevant to East Renfrewshire as well. So things like the time that a child spends between care, and the amount of foster carers they may be in, how active their voice is in that process, the children's hearing system, making sure that children are comfortable and well placed in it and have the skills to contribute it. So lots of these things come through that that we were able to say, right, no, we need to address that well. And I think the whole plan has changed, and it's couched around the priorities of the promise, and that's where the heart comes from. And indeed, I think the heart is one of the emblems of the promise. But if you go in particular to the corporate parenting pages of the plan, and if I can just flick to it, that will be able to give you the more. I'll even go to plan the page, it might be even easier. The families and carers give their children the best start in life. That's got to include our foster carers, and that is something that we couldn't necessarily say that was happening with many frequent. So it's embedded throughout. I'm just trying to get to the page, and forgive me, because if we were here face to face, I'd be able to flick just to the page, but I've got to. So we need to reduce the number of children in temporary accommodation. We need to make sure that children going to children hearing their voices actually heard. We need to make sure that investigations into domestic abuse or violence are timely. And this is stuff that we've been working on for a while, but there are clear priorities, Councillor Wallace, that we need to still focus on. And the KPIs that are new are linked mainly to that. So before we did look at things like the developmental milestones, the sort of health and decay, they're all featured in previous plans. But this time we've upped it a wee bit about repeat GP presentations for family wellbeing, children accessing mental health and wellbeing services, that's new. our staff being trauma informed. There's an initiative where we're going to have trauma champions, and again, that's linked to the promise as well as the trauma work going on nationally. So that's new. The looking to extend the community activities for children with complex needs. We've never measured that before, so we need to look and make sure it's actually having an impact. One of the things about previously we'd maybe measure like sort of school leaver destinations, we'd measure activities and achievement, but do we actually encourage children to make these healthy lifestyles choices? Have we got the scaffolds in place to do that? So again, that's another new one. And looked after children having more than one placement. Again, that's linked to a priority of the promise. We need to make sure that if they have more than one placement, is there a good reason? And if they're looked after away from home, have we moved with our permanence recommendation within 6 months of that? So there's a lot, and I'm sure our colleagues, this is a joint plan, and I'm sure our colleagues in health and social care will pick out other priorities. They're ones that maybe jump out to me from the involvement of the education department, but I'm sure they'll pick out others when it goes to council. But yeah, I think we're doing a good job. Can we do better? Absolutely. Is there measures and messages in the promise we need to address? Absolutely. Does this plan include it? Yes.
Okay, thank you. Supplementary, Councillor Wallace.
Not really a supplementary in the sense of a question, but just to say that I'm sure the staff within the department know that they will have the full support of the committee and everything that they can possibly do for our young people, and particularly, I think particularly the youngsters involved in our corporate parenting responsibilities. So thank you to Mrs. Collins for the response. We'll let you move on. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Wallace. Dr. Angel.
Thank you, Convener. I must admit to a slight declaration of interest, but not financial. I notice in page 72, and I'm very pleased to see on the right-hand side that very high in the list are the issues of dental decay, and as I'm a former dentist, and dental registration. I have a sense of curiosity, though, as the biggest cause of dental decay still remains the intake of sugar, is that how do our catering in schools ensure that there is a minimum of sugar levels? I don't necessarily expect an answer today, but I wonder if it's something that could be looked at, because there's no doubt that dietary considerations are one of the major causes of dental decay. Sorry to have my special interest mentioned.
No, I think it's a fair point, Dr. Angel, and I know that our catering teams are working all the time to meet the nutritional standards that are set by government and have real priorities in helping children and young people to make good and healthy choices around all aspects of their health and well-being, but of course around dental health as well. But perhaps Mrs. Collins might want to say something about that, the general point.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was just really to say that that measure is about dental decay when they join P1. So a lot of it is about our health visiting colleagues and the sort of advice they give on weaning and appropriate diet for children who are not school age, but also our nurseries. But we, all our nurseries and primary one, participate in the National Child Smile, which I'm sure you'll be aware of, Dr. Angel. So daily toothbrushing goes on. Even throughout COVID, it's still allowed because it's children using their own toothbrush and so on and so forth. But we do, our catering service fulfil all the requirements. There's 2 or 3 documents, what a different one from early years, what there is for the school, and they fulfil all those requirements to make sure that children get the proper diet and the proper balance of the different food groups. Much to the disappointment of some of our kids, though.
And indeed, I think,
Thank
as you said at the start, in line with national regulations, sugar has reduced in the menus across the board. Thank you very much. Councillor Bamforth, and then I'll take Councillor Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair. This paper is going to the IGB on the 3rd of March. So it hasn't, we've had a pre-meeting, but it hasn't actually, it will be public.
Thank you. That's what happens when I leave the committee. I'm not sure what's going on.
I know. It would have been sent. Oh no, Alan wouldn't know. Anyway, so it was just to clarify that. But I was particularly pleased to see the mental and emotional well-being of children and young people mentioned in this report, and especially the children and young people with complex additional needs, because that's something that parents have been highlighting to us. And I know Education and HSCP have been working really well. You know, they've been working collaboratively for a long time, and myself and Councillor O'Kane were at the launch of the Healthier Minds, which seemed a long time ago. I think it was just before the first lockdown, which was an excellent online resource. But I was delighted to hear during the week of the new Healthier Minds team, which it gets a bit confusing. It's slightly different. It's not the online, but there is a, so what I'm saying is that I'm delighted that's in it, and I'm delighted that there's so much more focus on looking after our young people's mental health, because we know for all young people, well, for all people, but young people in particular, this pandemic has really been difficult for them. And I know education are doing such a lot in terms of the mental health and emotional support of children. But this new Healthier Minds team is a real it's a real step forward in helping our children with complex additional needs as well, because they have, perhaps it's hard to say one sector has suffered more than others, but they have been particularly affected. So well done, Education, the HSCP, for the collaborative work they've done together, because I think this is something that is going to be welcomed by everybody. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Councillor Bamforth, for those comments, and I would associate myself with them, particularly on the Healthier Minds team and the work that has got on throughout COVID, and also will go on beyond, because it is such an important issue and resource. Councillor Buchanan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Just to echo some of the comments made, I think this is an excellent report, and I think what it does do is it highlights, in many respects, a lot of the interdepartmental work, the close working that we've developed over the last few years between education services, between our health services, and indeed our environment department and all of our wider partners. A huge amount of work was already being done, and we've been doing that. And I think that stands us in good stead moving forward to deliver on the outcomes and priorities of this report in the future. It's clearly going to, it'll continue to take a lot of work, but at least we know we're moving in the right direction. I very much welcome this report will have significant support, because I think we all recognise how important it is to get this right. And that's not just about the GIRFEC aspects of it, it's about how we take those children through to adulthood and how we deliver in the future. Therefore, I think this paper is very much welcomed. I look forward to the work being taken forward, as I said, but I think we put ourselves in a good position over the last few years with the departmental work that has gone on to deliver already on some of the aspects of it. But clearly we still have a way to go, and we look forward to hopefully achieving that with the full support, as I'm sure, of all the elected members, and indeed the cross departmental working and partnership working that will be involved across the area. So yeah, thanks very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Buchanan. Okay, if there are no further comments, I'll just summarise. I think we've had a very useful discussion there about the importance of this paper. Helpful contributions, I think, particularly around care experience young people, supporting them and the most vulnerable in our communities to really achieve everything we would want for them in life, and continuing to progress that agenda. I think we've had strong comments on mental health and wellbeing of young people, particularly through Healthier Minds, and I think a sense that we are all across the board signed up to this agenda and this important work, and that we would want to see this continue. And we will pass this now, of course, to the IJB and indeed to full council for further approval. But are we happy then to just acknowledge the duties of the Children and Young People's Act, which has been placed upon us relating to children's services planning, and note the content of the plan for 2020 to 2023? Okay, if we are. Colleagues, that concludes the business. However, before we finish this morning, I just wanted to take this opportunity to offer our condolences to Mrs Graham on behalf of the Catholic Church on the sad death of Archbishop Philip Tapalia last week, who I know's funeral takes place today. He was, of course, a partner with this committee and with education in East Hampshire when he was Bishop of Paisley, not least in the creation of St Clair's and Calderwood Lodge School in Newton Mearns. We would have worked closely with his representative, who was Father Tom Boyle, who many of you will remember from previous committees. But I did want to take this opportunity, as I had the opportunity to meet him when he was Archbishop, because he had a pastoral responsibility for Our Lady of the Missions. And indeed, the last time I met him was celebrating the outstanding Standards and Quality Report from HMIE at Our Lady of the Missions. So I just thought it would be important this morning to put on record our condolences and ask Mrs Graham to perhaps take them back to the representatives of the Catholic Church.
Can I thank you very much, the entire committee, for that. That's very much appreciated, and I will most certainly pass on your condolences to probably through Bishop Keenan at the Paisley Diocese, but I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. So that concludes our business. I hope you all have a good day, and we will see you at the next meeting of committee.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.